Hi students, welcome back to my channel. So for today, our topic is all about mutation. In this video lesson, what we want to do is to explain how mutations may cause changes in the structure and function of a protein. This is still part of Module 4 of Quarter 3, and in this lesson, you need prior knowledge on DNA, RNA, and the central dogma of molecular biology. So kung hindi mo pa yan napapanood, meron akong links na ipapakita sa itaas na pwede mong pindutin kung gusto mong balikan yung mga lesson na yon. It will be hard to understand the concept of mutation without knowing the basics about those concepts. What are mutations? Siguro marami na tayong mga napapanood na mga movie, katulad ng mga sa Marvel or kaya sa DC Universe, kung saan ang tawag sa mga tao na may special na abilities ay mutants. So tama naman yun. Mutants yung tawag dun sa mga organisms na merong mga mutations. However, take note na itong mga napapanood natin sa Marvel at saka sa DC Universe, sila ay fictional lang, hindi sila totoo. Pero, we have mutations in real life. So, ano nga ba itong mga mutations na ito? Mutations are changes made to an organism's genetic material. Bakit ba nagkakaroon ng mutations? Pwedeng errors in replication, pwedeng nagkaroon ng error due to transcription, pwedeng nagkaroon ng exposure sa radiation, pwedeng virus, at marami pang iba. So, napakaraming dahilan kung bakit nagkakaroon ng mutations. So, kung masama ba sila, kung mabuti ba sila, malalaman natin sa mga susunod na discussion natin. Ngayon, ano ba yung mga klase ng mutations? We have what we call point mutations. So, what are point mutations? Point mutations are a large category of mutations that describe a change in single nucleotide of DNA. This causes the DNA to be different from the normal type gene sequence. So, itong mutation na to, it can be possible that a nucleotide is switched for another nucleotide, or the nucleotide can be deleted, or pwede ring nagkakaroon ng insertion. Punta na tayo dun sa types ng point mutations. So first, we have insertion. Just like what the term implies, insertion, merong na-insert, merong napasok. So in this type of point mutations, an extra base pair is added to a sequence of bases. So just like for example, in your screen, I am showing you a normal DNA sequence. Okay, so ano bang itsura ng point mutation na may insertion? The normal DNA sequence would be CTT. However, C was inserted here. Kaya siya insertion. So, syempre, dahil nagkaroon ng C dyan, papartneran din siya ng G because you know that cytosine pairs with guanine. However, this type of point mutation, kahit sabihin natin na may na-insert lang siya na isa, meron na siyang malaking impact doon sa organism. Meron nang magiging kaibahan doon sa organism. Now, what is an example of a disease or a disorder that is caused by insertion? One example is what we call beta thalassemia. So, what is beta thalassemia? It is a blood disorder that reduces the production of hemoglobin. Diba? So, makikita natin, isang pagkakamali lang sa base pair, naging ganito na yung kanyang red blood cells. Meron na siyang blood disorder. The next type of point mutation would be deletion. So, if we have insertion, we have deletion. So, this is the opposite of what we have discussed a while ago. In deletion, extra base pair is deleted from a sequence. Now, comparing the normal DNA sequence that we used a while ago, here in deletion, may kita natin na nawala si adenine. So, syempre, dahil nawala si adenine, nawala na rin si uracil, nausog itong part na to. Ngayon, syempre, katulad nga na sinabi natin kanina, kahit isa lang yan, may impact yan. So, what is an example of a disease that is caused by this type of point mutation? An example of a disease caused by deletion is cystic fibrosis. So, what is cystic fibrosis? Cystic fibrosis is a hereditary disease that affects the lungs and digestive system. If a person has cystic fibrosis, his or her body produces thick and sticky mucus that can clog the lungs and obstruct the pancreas. Ano bang itsura ng may cystic fibrosis? Okay, so ganito siya. So, saan ba nagkakaroon ng deletion sa isang taong merong cystic fibrosis? According to research, most of cystic fibrosis cases would be caused by the deletion in delta F508, yung phenylalanine dito. Almost 70% of cystic fibrosis cases would be because of this. Next, aside from insertion and deletion, we have substitution. So, syempre, kaya nga siya substitution, may nagpapalit. Bases are swapped for different ones. Halimbawa, ito yung normal kanina. What happens is that you have a swap of bases here. Syempre, pag iniba mo yung letter na isa lang dyan, magiging iba na yung amino acid. And syempre, pag iba na yung amino acid, magkakaroon na ng effect yon sa body ng organism. So, one example of disease that arises from substitution is this one. This is called sickle cell anemia. Makikita natin dito sa kanan kung ano yung nangyari, specific na base pair na nagkaroon ng substitution. Here we can see that in the DNA sequence, the base adenine was substituted by the base thymine, and therefore this would result to a different mRNA sequence and consequently to a different amino acid. Okay, so that's all for point mutations. Again, we have 3 types of point mutations: insertion, deletion, and substitution. Now let's move to the larger scale mutations. Kasi itong mga point mutations na to, as you can notice, the changes are affecting the nitrogenous bases. Minsan, yung mutation ay nangyayari sa chromosome itself. And we call the effect genetic disorders. So what are genetic disorders? Genetic disorders are caused by an abnormality in the genetic makeup of an individual. And this abnormality can be caused by a chromosomal problem. So kung babalikan po natin yung video ng DNA RNA, doon pinakita ko kung nasaan ba si chromosome. So ano ba yung chromosome? A chromosome is a long DNA molecule. Para siyang bundle of DNA. So there you have a lot of DNA molecules and you have a lot of nitrogenous bases. Yung diniscuss natin kanina ng mga point mutations, small portion lang siya ng chromosome. Now this time, yung genetic disorders na i-discuss natin, they can be issues on the chromosome itself. Pwedeng naputulan si chromosome, pwedeng instead na dalawa si chromosome, naging 3, o kaya instead na dalawa si chromosome, naging 1 lang. Malaki ang effect nun doon sa organism. So, saan ba natin makikita yung mga bilang ng mga chromosome na yan? We have what we call a karyotype. So, this is an example of a normal human karyotype. What is a karyotype? It is an individual's collection of chromosomes. Pwede rin siyang tawag sa isang laboratory technique kung saan nakikita yung image ng chromosome ng isang individual. Now, what can you notice in a normal human karyotype? How many chromosomes do we have? As you can see, we have 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. 22 pairs would be autosomes, while the last pair would determine our gender. So if you are a female, your sex chromosome would be XX, while if you are a male, your sex chromosome would be XY. Yan yung normal. Dapat 46 lahat or 23 pairs. So sa mga susunod na mga slide, makikita natin yung mga karyotype ng mga genetic disorder na mababanggit natin. So makikita natin kung saan sila nagkaroon ng problema. Let's start with the first genetic disorder, which is the Kridusa Syndrome. So Kridusa means cat's cry. So, Kridusa Syndrome is also known as a 5p- syndrome. Ibig sabihin may problema sa chromosome number 5, in which one piece of that chromosome is missing. What do you notice with a person or an individual with the Kridusa syndrome? So they have distinctive facial features. Yung eyes nila medyo hiwalay ng onte. Makikita natin malaki ang space in between the two eyes. There are low set ears, small jaw, and a rounded face. So medyo frequent siya. It occurs in estimated 1 out of 20,000 to 50,000 newborns. And ganito yung itsura ng karyotype ng isang tao na may Kridusa syndrome. Ayan. So, medyo may naputol na onte sa chromosome number 5. Next. This is quite familiar. We call this Down syndrome. So, Down syndrome is also called trisomy 21. Now, what is trisomy? Actually, we have two terms that you will encounter. So, we have trisomy or monosomy. If we will go back to the karyotype I have shown to you a while ago, makikita natin na kada klase ng chromosome, there are 2. So, pair siya. Pag sinabi natin trisomy, yung 2 na yon naging 3. The number beside it would be the chromosome number. So, ibig sabihin, 3 yung chromosome number 21 ng mga tao na merong Down syndrome. Kapag naman monosomy, instead na 2, isa lang yung kanilang chromosome for that chromosome number. So, going back to Down syndrome, what happens to a person with Down syndrome? A person with Down syndrome has intellectual disability. It has a characteristic facial appearance. Kung mapapansin natin, halos pare-parehas yung kanilang itsura. And then, they have a weak muscle tone in infancy. Ano bang itsura ng karyotype ng may Down syndrome? Ganito siya. Trisomy 21 siya, so 3 yung chromosome number 21 niya. Next, genetic disorder, we have Edwards syndrome. If Down syndrome is trisomy 21, Edwards syndrome is trisomy 18. So by now, you will have an idea on how a karyotype of a person with Edwards syndrome would look like. So an individual with an Edwards syndrome would have abnormalities in many parts of the body. Bata pa lang sila, medyo kakaiba na yung kanilang appearance. They have low birth weight, and only 5 to 10% of children with this condition live past their first year. Usually, hindi sila nagtatagal. This occurs in about 1 in 5,000 infants. The karyotype would look like this. Since it is trisomy 18, the chromosome number 18 would be in 3 copies instead of 2. Next disorder, we have the Pathau Syndrome. The Pathau Syndrome is trisomy 13. So dahil nga trisomy 13, tatlo yung copies ng chromosome number 13, and this causes multiple and complex organ defects to children. Okay? Next, we have Jacobsen syndrome. So, for Jacobsen syndrome, hawig siya sa Kridusa syndrome. This time, may nabawas sa chromosome number 11. Children with Jacobsen syndrome have delayed development, including their speech and motor skills. So, yeah, this is an example of a karyotype of an individual with Jacobsen syndrome. Next disorder, we have the Kleinfelter Syndrome. Kleinfelter Syndrome affects males. So, anong meron sa isang tao na merong Kleinfelter Syndrome? These people have an extra copy of the X chromosome. If you remember, the last pair of chromosome determines the gender of a person. So, kapag lalaki, dapat XY. However, for people with Kleinfelter syndrome, instead of having XY, they have XXY. Thus, instead of having 46 chromosomes, they have 47. These interfere with their sexual development, and their testes would not function normally, and the levels of testosterone would be low. Kleinfelter syndrome is also an example of trisomy. Finally, we have Turner syndrome. Turner syndrome affects females. Ito naman si Turner syndrome, ito naman ay isang example ng monosomy. Again, for females, the last pair of chromosomes should be XX. However, for those who have Turner syndromes, the last pair would only be X. So what is the effect of this? The effect of this is that the development of the female characteristics would be affected. Usually, medyo pandak sila, short stature, and then this occurs in about 1 in 2,500 newborn girls. Dito makikita natin na medyo grayed out yung second sex chromosome. So, X lang ang natira instead of XX. So that's all for the types of point mutations and the different genetic disorders that can arise from mutations. Now let's try to relate what we have learned today with the present pandemic that we are experiencing. Everybody is familiar with the SARS-CoV-2 or the Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. Otherwise, it is commonly known as COVID-19. So, if you remember in our discussion of DNA and RNA, we have emphasized there that the genetic material of humans is DNA. On the other hand, for COVID-19 or for this type of virus, the genetic material is RNA or the ribonucleic acid. So therefore, for it to be able to replicate and to establish its infection, it must hijack a host cell and use that machinery to duplicate itself. So ano yung host cell na yun? Yun yung cell ng body natin. Just recently, sobrang tagal na ng pandemic natin. Lagpas na tayo ng 1 taon ng ating tinatawag na community quarantine. And just recently, maraming mga balita na lumalabas about the different variants. Meron tayong tinatawag na UK variant, meron tayong tinatawag na South African variant, meron tayong tinatawag na Brazilian variant. Now, how do we relate this with our lesson for today? So, usually, nagkakaroon pa rin ng errors dun sa duplication ng viral RNA. Again I want to emphasize too that COVID-19 is a virus, not a bacteria. They are different. So, because of these errors in the duplication or the replication process, this results in viruses that are similar but not exact copies of the original virus. Yun yung mga variants na tinatawag. So usually, yung mutation na nangyayari ngayon doon sa viral RNA ng COVID-19 virus ay doon sa spike glycoprotein niya. Okay, so anong nagiging effect niyan? Dahil doon sa mutation na yon, nagkakaroon na increased transmissibility. So, ibig sabihin, mas mabilis siyang maihawa from person to person and possible increased severity. So, ibig sabihin, mas mahirap din siyang i-cure. Pwede rin na maging less yung vaccine effectiveness kasi syempre yung pinagbasihan ng paggawa ng mga vaccines na meron tayo ngayon ay yung old strain, hindi itong mga variants na to. So all throughout this discussion, we have been focusing on the negative effects of mutation. Nakita natin yung iba-ibang mga genetic disorders, nakita natin iba-ibang mga sakit, nakita natin kung ano yung effect ng mutation dito sa COVID-19 virus. The question is, are mutations always bad? The answer is no. Okay, why? Because we have what we call favorable mutations. Why are there favorable mutations? Because these mutations give organisms an advantage over others. This ensures their survival. So for example, yung nasabi ko kanina about the COVID-19 virus variants. Itong mga variants na to, hindi siya favorable sa atin kasi tayo yung nai-infect. Pero favorable siya sa COVID-19 kasi pwede silang makasurvive dun sa ibang vaccine, pwede silang makapag-thrive sa ibang environment. It is for their survival. Kasi kailangan nilang mag-mutate na mag-mutate. Hahanap sila ng paraan para makapag-mutate sila, para makapag-thrive sila dun sa environment. Another example, bacterial drug resistance. So this is not beneficial for us humans, but this is beneficial for bacteria. Diba? For us to treat some bacterial infections, we drink antibiotics. However, if you drink a lot of that antibiotics, this can cause drug resistance. Ibig sabihin, there will come a time that that bacteria will be used to that antibiotics and kahit gaano karaming antibiotics yung inumin mo, hindi na siya maapektuhan. That's why doctors would prescribe antibiotics for just a certain length of time. Hindi ka pwedeng inom ng antibiotics. Another example of beneficial mutation is this. So, from this news, the source can be found in the bottom part of the screen. There is a family in Italy which developed a resistance or a mutant protein that can ward off arteriosclerosis or heart disease, even in high-fat diet. So, I researched about this and nakita ko naman na legit naman siya. And this was way back in 1994. Medyo matagal na. Okay, so another beneficial mutation is this. So, siguro nakita nyo na yan dun sa mga nakaraang diniscuss ko. This is sickle cell anemia. Now, how is this a benefit? Diba diniscuss ka natin siya kanina as a disorder? So, according to studies, it has been found that people who are carriers of sickle cell anemia has some genetic protection from malaria, which is regarded as the king of tropical diseases. So aside from dengue, kasi mas usual yung dengue sa atin, malaria is also a disease that is brought by mosquitoes. So somehow beneficial pa rin siya kasi kahit may sickle cell anemia ka, meron kang protection dun sa malaria. So next beneficial mutation is tetrachromacy. Ito, tetra meaning 4. Tayo kasi mga tao, trichromats tayo. We have 3 types of cones which are attuned to different wavelengths of light, the blue, the green, and the red. However, there are organisms that are tetrachromats like goldfish, birds. They have 4 types of cones. So, mas maganda yung paningin nila sa mga bagay-bagay kasi nga yung perception nila of color ay mas nai-improve nung number of cones nila. And the last example of beneficial mutation that we have here is lactose tolerance. Meron tayong tinatawag na lactose tolerance and lactose intolerance. Pag sinabi nating lactose tolerance, yun yung mga tao na kahit uminom sila ng gatas, hindi sumasakit yung tiyan nila. They are able to digest lactose. However, those people who are lactose intolerant can't really digest lactose. Actually, most people in the world are lactose intolerant. Pero, there is a genetic mutation where cytosine in a human body is replaced with thymine, which allows them to digest milk. Okay, so those are just a few of the beneficial mutations. That's all for today. I hope you learned something from my presentation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment them down below. And if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video lesson. Bye!